This is me and Marky. You've worked across 13 African countries, consulting with corporate startups and governments. I just want to add to this, you've got names. The Rainmaker, Chief, what was the other one?
Yeah, those two. African Rainmaker or Chief.
The startup plumber, I think we spoke. Okay, so what unique challenges or opportunities have you observed in fostering innovation across Southern Africa?
No, you're starting with the jugular, because it's one of those things where I feel we still have so much to overcome. So beyond the hope and the potential of what exists, I mean, I come from a time after, where we were lacking ideas and we were lacking innovators, we were lacking an ecosystem. And as soon as you start fixing some of those kind of unique challenges, you then realize that these things go deeper. So when you start going deeper, you begin to realize that infrastructure remains a challenge on our continent in terms of access to the World Wide Web, in terms of connectivity. We still have pockets of difficulty in affordable broadband, affordable access to the internet. Again, we still have areas, even in our own country, where we still lack infrastructure for last mile connectivity. So that's a very real, tangible one that we should have overcome in the late 90s, early 2000s, but those still remain. One of the other ones that I think primarily a lot of early stage innovators are dealing with is availability of capital and the ease of availability of capital. But I come from a very different school of thought in terms of that question. Primarily, I say the funds are there in different forms. One is a conscious understanding that the biggest interest in our innovation actually doesn't come from local investors. About 60% of venture capital that's coming into Africa these days comes in from overseas, from the US, from Europe, from the UK. South Africa does kind of become a bit of an exception to this, so it brings that down to a decent kind of parity between 40 and 50% of the blended finance. But if you speak Southern Africa specifically, it's still very much an international kind of game. So a lot of innovators need to understand this from day one, that there is a possibility that you're not likely to get funding from a local investor, that you're probably better off looking for an international investor from day one. And so funding becomes a critical one. But thirdly is, and this is an area that I've now kind of been working on the last two years, is the absence of corporate procurement of our innovations and solutions in Southern Africa. There's too much offshoring of digital. I think the corporates in Southern Africa know the knowledge economy is upon us, digitization, consumer trends in terms of how consumers consume is changed, but they still are willing to buy those services internationally.
Yeah.
And if they just shifted how they procure to more local innovations, more local solutions, and they trusted them, would have a real kind of acceleration of growth in our ecosystem.
I think that's one of the things that we've started noticing in COVID was that like reliance on this global ecosystem. But it's that thing for me, the pendulum always swings too far. Have we swung too far on the globalization kind of perspective? Are we now seeing a trend, in your opinion, to more South African-based like procurement, as you mentioned?
So it's driven not necessarily by demand, funny enough. It's driven by some of the factors that I think one takes for granted at times. So on one level, a lot of corporates offshore to India, but when the inflationary rate and the government taxation system starts becoming challenging and problematic in procuring services, it pushes the cost of procuring the services. People start thinking for solutions. When there's a war in Ukraine, and that war directly affects Central Europe, Romania, Poland, Ukraine itself, when that talent is now affected, it suddenly shifts the context of demand. So what I wish would happen is an intentional sensibility to procure locally, because again, when you procure locally, you're purchasing in a local currency. You don't have to deal with currency deviations. When you procure locally, you advance the local knowledge ecosystem. When you procure locally, you support talent development locally.
Absolutely.
So the more we kind of get to that point, naturally, where there's a demand, then you'll start seeing that happen directly. For now, I think other factors are pushing are pushing that interest.
Other factors. let's not speak about other factors. You mentioned international funding, and my question is, when we look at South African startups, South African ideas, what are international funders looking for? I'm assuming scalability. Are they looking to solve South African problems? Are they looking to make money? What are they looking at?
So the first thing I think everybody must remember is that the premise that drives any investor is the ability to return capital as well. So, I mean, I wouldn't say per se it's looking for money. It's a return on capital, and that sometimes, in some instances, that return on capital might be a driver of value impact that impacts humanity in general, in terms of advancing humanity. I think I've been traveling the world since 2011 to different kind of innovation ecosystems around the world. When I was starting to travel, there was a curiosity around Africa. What's happening now is that there's a direct interest in Africa. It becomes the last frontier market where opportunities can come. But Africa is not the easiest place in the world to make money. So it's not exactly, wrapped up in a beautiful bow and it's easy for you to translate. Based on the challenges that I mentioned earlier, that create this kind of latency gap for founders to succeed. So the first kind of port of call that I think people must understand is, as long as you can return capital and you can create value in society, any investor will be interested.
Yeah.
The second thing, I think it's ignorant to ignore what we are doing here. And I think something has to be said about the value of our innovations, especially in the context of Global South. So Africans are really very ingenious in their innovations. They're very intelligent in how they bring it up.
And teamwork.
And they're very good at accelerating their growth. But at the same time, I think secondarily to that would be to say we have a very big consumer market of 1.4 consumers that just need an opportunity to be nurtured, to grow to the next level so that we can continue that continuum of growth. And again, like I said to you earlier, when we think about these things, we think about them in 50-year cycles.
Yeah.
And when you start imagining what's possible when you have a population where the average age in Africa is 19 and a half or 20 years old, that future looks very bright. But we need to make sure that, again, we procure from a local base that allows for that economic kind of growth to be not only stable, but to be accelerated as well.
You can't build on a shaky foundation. So it's
or a bunch of broke, poor people. It's just not, it's not a sensible thing to think
if you
about.
want to go direct, absolutely. But so is that where we should be focused now, is on stabilizing and building a solid foundation for the future to come?
So the way I communicate with a lot of my investee companies and a lot of my mentees is to be world-class, okay? There's a basis of argument to be made that, if you focus on building world-class solutions, the rest of the ecosystem will take care of itself. I think too often our founders are very highly domesticated in their outlook. Their context of geography, again, this is the nature of our ecosystem, is that the advantage that the developed economies have over us is the quality of access to education that they have. It's the fact that they've got experience and travel at the core, and they've got access to a global network of intelligence support. The minute we start balancing these things against each other, I think Africa definitely has a better chance of success.
When we speak about networks and partnerships, that's directly tied to opportunity for me. Like it feels like in Africa we're still struggling to get access to that network. And I'm also thinking about language and communication. We need to speak the same language and communicate in the same way so that we understand each other from a international investor's perspective and from a local problem-solving perspective. So how important is partnerships, networks, and access to those partnerships for our African innovators?
Critical and crucial.
Yeah.
Partnerships are absolutely critical and crucial. Again, the ability, I always say to my guys, your ability to know that in order for you to be successful, you have to basically fly somewhere else to make that happen and understand how to make that connection work. We do have some areas of advantage here in the sense that Africa finds itself pretty much at the center of the globe in either way that you look at it. And we also universally have this platform that has 3 or 4 kind of core languages that drive our market, whether it's Anglophone Africa or Francophone Africa or Lusophone Africa. So we can offer solutions that drive impact around developed kind of nurtured partnerships with different parts of the world.
Yeah.
So this is what I do, this is what I believe in, and this is what I encourage everybody else to do. Right now, a lot of my personal focus and interest is around India and the opportunity of what we can build with that subcontinent. And primarily when you think about it from a numbers perspective, right now as we speak in 2024, there's a lot of kind of parity alignment with ourselves and the Indian subcontinent as a continent. So Africa has got about 1.4 billion people, India has got about 1.4 billion people. So together, give or take about 3 billion people. And then if you look at the size of the GDPs of both the continent of Africa and the subcontinent of India, it's pretty much in parity as well. But when you think about it, we also know that in the next 6 years, India is going to grow to such an extent, accelerated rate, that's going to be the third biggest economy by GDP in the world. And this is where we as Africans can see a lot of opportunity to collaborate and partner, to advance consumption, and to grow footprint. And again, not only allow that to be one-sided, where the Indians are selling us solutions, I think primarily for us to also see opportunity to sell solutions to their market, because we have a lot of similar conditions on the ground.
That was exactly my next question, is like, do we see similarity in challenges and therefore similarity in innovation? In other words, we have access to solving the problem in this market, but also immediately access to solving it in theirs.
And I think this is the thing. People really disconnect from this. I've had the great fortune of working in different parts of the world. And in doing so, you realize if you work in South America, yes, there might be a language thing, but primarily the conditions are the same.
Yeah.
If you go to Southeast Asia, the language might be not necessarily as bad as South America, but there's clearly a very kind of common set of interests. So depending on the segment of industry that you're working or solutioning around, you're always going to find traction and value in doing so. Let alone Africa. I mean, just for everybody's context, the intra-Africa trade environment at the moment is under 15% of total kind of trade amongst African countries as well.
Okay.
The ease of movement is near impossible in Africa. It's sometimes even cheaper to travel to the West than it is to travel continentally in continental Africa amongst each other's countries. The more these barriers go down, I think the wider the economy would work. But in order for people to survive and to remain sustainable, I'm a person who doesn't kind of knock the opportunity to build with our colonial kind of traditional trading partners up until such time as we get to a point where this transition becomes a reality. And I definitely see that happening within the next decade.
I love that you mentioned that, because that's also a question I want to ask. And I mean, if we look historically, Africa has been very much at the center of trade economies, whatever. Going into the future, you're saying it's going to play an even more important role.
To me, again, call me an optimist. They do call me the African rainmaker. Maybe I'm drinking too much of my Kool-Aid, my own Kool-Aid. But the reality for me is that the future absolutely is built in Africa for the world. The future is absolutely in Africa. And the future of innovation ultimately will rise from Africa. Okay? Yes, I can do a whole spiel and a whole kind of narrative to say, by the way, the biggest driver of this growth right now is an African in Elon Musk. But we all know, again, that can be debatable, but I still believe it. I think there's something about having grown up in South Africa that just gives him that uniquity of outlook and edge that makes them stand out in different ways. But I think there's a whole lot more outside of him, Elon alone, when you think about the number of Africans who are innovating and bringing out new solutions, especially in a leapfrog kind of context. I know everybody doesn't like this term, but in a leapfrog context in terms of new innovations. Yeah. Go and look who are the top engineers in AI today. They're Africans, okay? So there's something about an environment that I think allows us to really connect humanity in a way, and again, find genius and value in a kind of a future kind of humanity and the knowledge ecosystem.
It's interesting for me, like the challenges that we have in this country, like we have a big majority of our population going like, oh, challenges, it's negativity. And for me, that immediately presents opportunity, and that's why we have innovation. If you think about something like load shedding, it is awful, it is terrible, the impact to our economies are undeniable. But doesn't this present us with an opportunity to be at the forefront of renewable energy sources, which is something that the rest of the world is now trying to catch up on?
Yep.
Is that me being silly?
No, you're absolutely right. When you understand really the depth of need. And I know in South Africa, South Africans tend to look down on themselves a lot, unfortunately. The reality is that whatever solutions we kind of innovate around in terms of renewable energy and solar are applicable in the rest of the continent. People will be blown away. You know, the reality of load shedding is universal. When I was in Delhi in India, the capital of India, we experienced load shedding. Okay, and it was not a big dramatic thing as we make it in South Africa. Yeah. So for me, it's a case of look, again, when you look at the opportunities and positives that again necessitate innovation. Again, we have an adage in our country that is a Burmaka plan. And then we'll evolve that adage to an African Maka plan.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because this is the way that our people kind of do things. And this is a way that will drive innovation through a very unique set of circumstances for the global south primarily, but equally for the rest of the world as well. So, especially around cost. Because I think the reality of the West is that they as much as they drive new innovation, it tends to be very unaffordable and very expensive. Yeah. And I think we'll bring solutions that are far more affordable
Absolutely.
and far more practical.
For me, it sometimes feels, and this is why we are also a part of this, but we don't have that voice. We're not measuring ourselves against the international space like we should. How important is the storytelling? How important is it for us to actually get our voice out there and be heard and be seen and be understood for what we are doing at the moment?
You know, for me, there's nothing better than storytelling. Africans are supposed to be, you know, the greatest group of people in doing so. In fact, I happen to believe that Kenyans are the best people in terms of storytelling.
Love them.
But I think where the world is, in terms of the availability of platforms for distribution and the availability of the opportunity for a gap for new voices to come to the fore, this is where we are, okay? I think the way that the world operates now, you know, we've got successful YouTube stars, TikTok stars that are making a tremendous impact. And again, what you guys are doing in terms of where that future of this of content creation is going to be huge. The consumption of content is going to be really a key influencer in terms of how consumer behavior is shaped, how influence itself,
especially in Africa.
100%.
Let's ask you one last question, bringing it back to the South African Innovation Summit. How important is an event like this to get all of these voices in the same room and have them have these types of conversations?
This is, to me, it's a tremendous milestone that is not necessarily getting its due recognition. I believe that this platform should be the pinnacle of showcase and dialogue and discussion about not only reflectively looking at achievement, but outwardly looking at the future prospective opportunity that exists. I think there's definitely a missed opportunity here by our private sector, by our public sector, our government, in really shaping the narrative and story. So how do we move the needle in terms of, again, being a platform of showcase for the best of what we have to present as South Africa to a widening interest group of procurement and procurers. And again, we'll be working on that, me and my team, with Muntu and his team going forward from here.
I am overwhelmed with positivity. I'm drinking your Kool-Aid.
Please, listen. And again, your audience, please, for me, the future of what we're building now as a business at Sandbox International is a belief that, in order to better support the innovation ecosystem of entrepreneurship and founders in Africa, we need to spend less time supporting the founders themselves. And again, it might sound like a weird thing to say, but as somebody who's been doing this for 14 years, I reached a point where we had to reflect on, is supporting the founder ecosystem the best and only solution to do so? And I've more or less incrementally shifted my thinking around this. And we at Sandbox International are now building an ecosystem of experts and practitioners who support a more deeper kind of value impact and output. And like I said earlier, if we are to attract the best of the world's investors into our space, we have to have founders and companies that can grow and build world-class businesses. And in order to do so, we have to be comfortable in building solutions that, again, are built on a strong foundation. And I think that's still missing in our ecosystem. Our kind of general history the past 2 years is seeing a lot of broken companies even though they've raised capital, they lack governance, they lack sustainability, they lack focus. So how do we shift that? Is surround these guys with world-class experts, guys and girls. That's with world-class experts that help them really achieve that goal and objective. So that's the mission I'm on now. That's the mission I'm building for the next 5 years.
You're building a better South Africa, better Africa,
100%,
better world.
100%.
That's what we can do.
Yeah.
We want to change the world.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
That's awesome. What a chat.